I hope you can see me, hear me, and you're on a good connection. Um, what I'd like to explore with you today is a simple but important idea, which is why some businesses scale and others stall, despite having good strategy and very capable people. Um, I propose to talk for around about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, and share some insights from the work that I do with senior teams and describe a practical way to diagnose where you are today, and most importantly, what to do about it. To manage flow, we'll have three Q&A sessions when I'll pause every 10 minutes or so and pick up whatever has come through on the chat. This is being streamed across multiple platforms, and their functionality is invariably different. So please use the chat channel that's available to you, and hopefully any comments, questions that you have will come together and arrive with me in one single feed. So fingers crossed that that technology works. So let me begin and get straight into it by starting with a very simple observation, which is most senior leadership teams don't scale businesses. They just run them. And these are not the same thing. Running businesses is all about effort. And many people I speak to liken it to a game of splat the rat, yeah? Keeping things moving, solving immediate problems, making tactical decisions. But scaling a business is different. Scaling requires systems, not just effort. And that system is built by the senior leadership team, which is my particular point of focus and interest. So before I go into some of the detail on that, just a few, not many, very brief words on me for those who don't know me and why I've become somewhat obsessed as I have about senior leadership teams. Just to say, I started my career many years ago working as an analyst in a chairman's office in one of the country's biggest family firms at the time. I spent my days inside spreadsheets, analyzing mergers and acquisitions. I very much enjoyed the work that I did, but what really caught my attention was what the numbers didn't explain, and ultimately what really informed go or no go investment decisions. Put simply, on paper, many businesses look remarkably similar, yet the reality was that their valuations were very different. And I wanted to understand why. So that question shaped the career that I followed. And I moved into roles focused on how organizations actually work day to day, how senior teams operate, how decisions got made, and why some businesses consistently deliver whilst others stall despite having good strategies and very capable people. And the real light bulb moment came on for me during work that I did on turnarounds. I spent a few years in this space. And there was one particular case where I was working with a biotech business, which was in crisis. What changed performance wasn't just strategy alone, it was redesigning the senior leadership team, the focus of its work, how it worked together, and how it faced into the business. And as the leadership system changed and the SLT actually got much smaller, the business scaled from 3.5 million to over 35 million in just under 3 years. And that experience is the one that fundamentally shaped the work that I do today. and informs the approach that I wrote about in my book, Lighting the Blue Touch Paper, which had a highly successful launch just before Christmas, becoming a bestseller, #1 in Amazon, and is now picking up some really very attractive 5-star reviews, which consistently point to how grounded and practical the content is. Today, I work with business leaders to design and coach senior teams which investors trust and that businesses can scale behind to maximize enterprise value at exit. And it's my experience that leadership isn't about individual heroics, it's about a leadership system. Managers work in the system applied, and it's the leaders who work on the system that is designed. And when that system is designed well, everything lifts. So this afternoon, I'd like to do or share 4 things with you in particular. First is to highlight a blind spot. Secondly is lay bare a myth. Third is share a powerful tool that I use with senior teams that starts an honest conversation. And lastly, outline a practical approach to designing senior leadership teams that can scale a business. For my money, the senior leadership team is the single most important performance lever in any organization, and its purpose is to design and build the leadership system the firm operates, and managers work within to deliver the results. Now, ultimately, it's the leadership team that decides what the business does. Strategy, priorities, where attention goes, how decisions get made, and who is held accountable and where in the organization. And suffice to say, if the leadership team is aligned, decisive, and collectively accountable for enterprise outcomes, the business moves very quickly. However, if the leadership is cautious, fragmented, or political, the organization is cautious, fragmented, and political, and slows right down. The ironic thing for me is most senior leadership teams I meet describe themselves as high performing, which I always find kind of fascinating, because if it were true, then the business problems that we repeatedly encounter would be solved by now. So this erroneous belief I'm referring to about high performance is actually a condition which has a name. And to explain what I'm referring to, I'd like to take you back in time and introduce you to a gentleman, John Cannell, who completed a comprehensive research study in the US education sector back in 1987 to investigate how all 50 states were claiming educational outcomes that were all above the national average. Amongst the many things he asked students to rate was their ability to get along with others. Over 70% of students rated themselves in the top 10%. 94% of university professors say that they're doing a better job than their average colleague. So our illusions of superiority on what we do, and critically how well we perform as profiled by J.J. Cannell, are so widespread that psychologists came up with a name for it and call it the Lake Wobegon effect, which is taken from Garrison Keillor, who had a satirical radio show which featured the town of Lake Wobegon, where all women are strong, all men are good looking, and all children are of above average intelligence. The harsh reality is most leadership teams believe they're performing at a higher level than they actually are because of how they're looking at themselves. And inside a leadership team, people benchmark against effort and intent. You know, we're working really hard, we're really committed, we're doing our best. But outside the leadership team, um, staff and employees benchmark something really very, very different. It's around speed of decision making. It's what they see is consistency of execution or alignment across the enterprise and application of common standards. These are very, very different lenses, which is why, as shown here, 92% of employees think their SLT is ineffective. And given half the SLT surveyed don't know what they're doing or why they exist, then that finding is of itself not really a surprise. Um, Sometimes I would suggest this kind of perspective is described as arrogance on behalf of the senior leadership team. I would contend that it's not, it's just simply a blind spot. Many leadership teams collectively experience a lake woebegone effect, namely the tendency for them to believe as a leadership team that they're above average. So when I start my work with senior leadership teams, I tend to discover some familiar patterns. Um, Most businesses don't fail because of bad strategy. They're much more likely to fail because of what happens between the strategy that's developed and planned for and the actual results achieved. Decisions get revisited, silos protect their own agenda. Ownership turns out not to be real ownership. And individually, none of this looks particularly dramatic in terms of costs. And this is the thing, you know, leadership failings rarely, if ever, present as a crisis. It just shows up as friction, drag, and drift. And collectively, that drift, which is largely invisible and which doesn't get captured in a single cost center, can add up to 3 to 5% of margin. And if you're targeting 10%, you know, that's a big slice. So here's the thing, it's not so much a performance issue as a leadership system issue, as friction gradually builds up inside the organization and the business ends up working harder to compensate for that. But it doesn't move any faster. And as I said a moment ago, most senior teams that I meet will happily describe themselves as high performing, when in fact they're caught up in the here and now, and the fundamental question which they're missing isn't whether they're high performing or not. I genuinely think high performing is a red herring because as will become obvious in a few minutes, not all high performing teams are actually built to scale. So whilst I look through the chat channel, I'm just going to quickly scan for any questions. I'll put up this QR code that connects you to a short quiz that you can take 3 minutes to complete. The quiz gives you a flavor of how your senior leadership team performs and helps you pinpoint some points, friction points, which may not be quite so obvious to you. So it's really designed to surface some of those blind spots. It's free, by the way, and if you complete it, I'll send you a PDF of my best-selling book as an extra bonus. So no questions, so let me just crack on. So I'd like to share a tool that I use in the work that I do to identify what level a senior team is operating at and its relative maturity when it comes to scaling a business. At the left end, hopefully, of the spectrum that you can see, namely the support team, advisory team end, the leadership group exists primarily to support the founder or CEO, MD. And in the case of the support team, the founder operates as the single spider on the web. Information travels up, decisions come down, and you can rest assured that blame goes in all directions. The advisory team is set up and operates as a sounding board for a founder or MD, where lots of discussion takes place, lots of ideas are tested. However, authority and decision making still sits with one person. So what we have here is in reality a talking shop. It feels very collaborative, but nothing much is really going on. And this is where chasing the red herring of high performance has real consequences, because these two teams may very well be high performing in how they are set up, but they will not scale a business. They simply will just not do that. They will fall well short. And the design here betrays a lifestyle business, not a performance business, which would be designed to scale. Then there's the functional team, which is where most organizations get stuck. The senior teams typically populated by strong individual specialists who fight their corner, protecting their budgets and their interests in sales, operations, or finance. And each function probably performs well, but alignment across the business is fragile at best. And when under pressure, the business invariably stalls as everybody retreats to their area of focus. The collaborative team, which is the next one along here, can run the business without the founder. Decisions are collective, leaders think beyond their function, and leaders are very good at holding each other to account, which is no modest task in itself. But the biggest shift by far happens at the enterprise leadership team, because of how authority is distributed both across the team as well as below the senior team. And this is what really sets this particular team apart. It's because of the system that it builds. Decision rights are clear. People know who decides what and at what level. Priorities are aligned. There's an integrated agenda, not multiple competing functional or department agendas. Execution is disciplined. There's a rhythm. Meetings, metrics, and follow through are all consistent, and accountability is visible. And critically, any commitments that are made are tracked and honored. So the leadership system is clear. And so because of that, it scales. It has a number of different parties who can engage with it and adopt it and take it on and push it further confidently without dependency upon a founder CEO, heroic effort, or just holding things together. And to make an important point, these teams, collaborative teams, don't always scale the business. Sometimes collaboration is where most leadership conversations kind of stop in the pursuit of alignment. And that's necessary. And, but it's not sufficient. Alignment improves performance. Systems make performance scalable. That's the big distinction here. So here we go. For the backup detail on this, and this will make your eyes bleed, just take a screenshot or a photograph of this particular chart. I'll leave it up for a moment. But it gives you an insight into the different dimensions that make up this maturity profile that sits behind this tool. And just to make an important point about the longer term consequences, if you're explicitly looking to scale to sell, because when buyers see a fragile leadership system dominated by one individual, risk increases, and that risk creates a discount to whatever value a multiple of earnings provides. So on this chart, the horizontal line is that multiple of earnings, whatever it is, 4, 6, 8 times EBITDA typically. And the figures above that line and below it are positive and negative variances on basically a desktop valuation. By contrast, when buyers experience an aligned leadership system, confidence increases. Yeah, and that confidence commands a premium. So what you get is this line that can be drawn across the different types of leadership team. Fragile leadership teams often attract discounts approaching 30%, very common, and cohesive leadership enterprise teams can command premiums of 20% or perhaps even more, depending on the dynamics of a particular sector. So the difference here isn't intelligence, I have to say, around any of that, but it's very much around how the systems are designed. So just do a quick scan for any questions. Put up this QR code for the quiz if you want to take part in it. And as I said before, if you do, I'll send you a PDF of the book, which is quite a meaty thing, I hasten to add. And you can also join a newsletter for updates and free content and occasional bonus material. So I'll just crack on and talk about what I tend to do next, having done some of that profiling work around a senior leadership team in terms of where it sits and how it operates and why. Because without design, performance isn't actually going to scale. So I've developed this other tool, this SLT or Leadership Operating System Canvas, which forces a senior team to answer a set of really deceptively simple questions to create what I call system levers. And these are, how decisions are made, what decisions belong at this particular table, and sorting that out adds an enormous amount of speed to how a business can progress. What behaviors define how we lead together, which is incredibly important for consistency, and is a big factor why 92% of people think their senior leadership team is not effective because they see double standards. How we manage conflict, and how we resolve disagreement, what norms shape behavior effectively that we can scale. What does enterprise accountability really mean, and how do we recognize it and make it visible? And I would really stress that the value of these conversations isn't so much in terms of what they add, it's about what they actually remove, which is ambiguity, politics, unpicking agreed decisions once you leave the room, and a sense of creeping misalignment as different standards get interpreted and applied. And the really important thing here that often gets missed is how leadership gets measured as it's practiced. Um, Developing your own SLT performance dashboard allows the teams to see whether it's actually doing the right things and is the team doing it well. And it turns instinct into evidence, if I can put it that way. This matters because leadership teams are very often opinion rich and evidence poor. And the dashboard idea that I'm promoting here really forces prioritization, and it surfaces what really matters most and what doesn't. A weak senior team only really comes together in meetings, and it tends to be very activity focused and spends its life in reporting mode. By contrast, a strong SLT is system focused, works on shaping the future and delivering enterprise outcomes. So, work on a dashboard is challenging, but takes some effort to design because it deliberately brings together three different types of data. First, how the team feels it's operating, and there's a number of diagnostic tools that you can lean on to help bring an insight in that. But the real power in it is tracking it over time. The qualitative human reality of how leadership is felt within the business. Second is the leading indicators that show whether the right things are happening day to day. And third, the lagging results that confirm whether these efforts are actually paying off. When senior leadership teams don't build systems, execution risk increases, growth invariably slows down, and value, as shown earlier, becomes discounted. When they do make the shift from opinion to operating with data focused on the SLT's performance becomes much more predictable, growth accelerates, and value compounds. And I would say that most senior teams don't struggle because everything's broken. They struggle because one or two of these elements are a bit thin and the rest of the system that's in place is quietly working around the gaps. When norms are fuzzy, politics creeps in. And when roles aren't clear, decisions slow down or float upwards invariably. And when there's no execution rhythm, strategy starts to look really good on slides but goes nowhere in practice. So a performance dashboard like this helps by providing evidence that spotlights gaps on what needs to be worked on. And I've got to stress that time and again that high-performing SLTs lead beyond function. They align around a shared purpose, give others the space and confidence to act, and hold themselves accountable as a group rather than as individuals protecting their own patch. So intentional leadership is very much their calling card, and they practice it religiously to develop leaders within their own reporting lines so that the whole business operates as though it's on the front foot. And so a well-designed dashboard makes that very visible. It shows how leadership's really landing in terms of execution speed, trust, clarity, and accountability. And once leadership can be seen, it can be improved. It stops being personal and it starts being professional. And this is where it all comes together. Strong SLTs reduce execution risk by making leadership visible at multiple points in the business, increase predictability, and build investor confidence and attract a premium at sale. So let me just work towards a conclusion by sharing an observation. Every organization becomes a reflection of the conversations which are happening at the top of it. And I think I've said already, if those conversations are cautious, fragmented, or political, the whole organization becomes cautious, fragmented, and political. And if those conversations are clear, challenging, and enterprise focused, the whole organization will move faster, become braver, and be more aligned, which is why senior leadership teams matter so much. Not because the senior team sits at the top of the structure, but because it sets the tone, the ambition, the speed, and the trajectory for the entire business. So when people look at your leadership team, what do you think they see? Because the leadership system sets the conditions, but it's the behavior that determines the outcome. And in leadership teams, that behavior typically shows up in one of three ways. So, passengers, intelligent people who attend meetings but not influencing outcomes, because you're not tapping into the talent that they're bringing to the table. Those are supportive or advisory senior leadership teams. They're very passive places to live. Pretenders, who are articulate contributors, may generate a lot of activity, but they are extremely adept at avoiding accountability. So these are classically heavily siloed organizations protecting their own patch and optimizing a function at the expense of the business. Performers are leaders who think beyond their function and make decisions, and they own enterprise outcomes. So I keep that model in your mind when you're observing behaviors around the room in terms of, are you really getting back what you really want to see and hear? Because very often I think the harsh reality is you won't, because the senior team has not been designed to optimize performers in the way that I'm describing it. And so when you're building a senior leadership team, one of the questions that I would really ask you to focus in on is, first of all, reflect on what your leadership team's purpose and role is, and whether that team simply runs the business or whether it's a team that's being built that scales the business by developing and creating and sustaining a leadership system that can indeed be scaled. And that, for my money, is the really critical question to be addressed. So hopefully that's triggered a few thoughts, got the grey matter working, and by all means connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not connected already. I regularly post on LinkedIn and generate quite high levels of engagement, I'd suggest, largely because I only post my own original material. And if you're leading a senior team, then by all means, scan the code, the QR code to complete a short diagnostic and see where you are. It's deliberately designed to help you understand a little bit more about the real character of your senior team that you're building, and whether it is destroying or adding to the value of the business. And I'll happily share a PDF of the book that I produced last year. So one last look for questions, and I think I've got one here coming through. Do you think there are differences in how to effectively implement, approach solving these really key issues of SLT behavior in public service leadership compared to the private sector? Wow, how long have you got? I think, and I've worked in both, but I spend the vast majority of my working life in private sector and not public sector. But I think at senior leadership team level, the purpose and role within private and public sectors tend to be quite different. Public sectors per se don't have an explicit agenda to grow and scale a business, for example. But the behaviors that you see within a public sector organization, which are more towards the right end of the scale, would also be commonly found within a private sector organization. There are some nuances in terms of how you might interpret that and apply it. But I think there is, by far and away, much more that's in common and that is shared between private and public sector when it comes to senior leadership teams. And it's a really interesting question that I'm going to take some more time to reflect on. And I think you've probably given me a prompt for some content to produce for LinkedIn. So look out for some posts, if I may put it that way, in the days and weeks ahead, because I think given the size of the public sector, it tends to get overlooked when it comes to the application of much of this kind of material. I'm always struck, there was some years ago, I remember I used to be living and working in London, and going into Waterstones in Trafalgar Square, and they've got in the business book department, or floor, whole section of books given over to, performance management, HR, finance, law, leadership, of course, huge shelf in itself. And then you go over to the public sector section, and of course, Whitehall's just around the corner here, the centre of government. And there's just 4, 5, 6 books maybe out of hundreds of books which are available. So I really do think public sector does tend to get overlooked. So I will definitely focus on that question and write a few posts about it in terms of sharing my thoughts. The key issue, I think, is there's much more in common and less difference than I think you would believe when looking at it from the outside. Okay, so there we are. That's the material I have to share. If there's no other questions, I'll leave it there and give you 20 minutes of your life back and just draw stumps. Thank you very much for participating, and I hope this material is of some value to you. Take care and enjoy what I think looks like a beautiful evening in Prospect. Take care. Cheers now.